An incident that occurred in one of Canada's ancient forests was seen as an unbelievable event by everyone. One day, David, who worked as a park ranger, was patrolling the depths of the forest to keep an eye on the surroundings. Suddenly, David stopped because he had heard an unfamiliar, echoing sound. He glanced around in alarm at first. David was someone who trusted his instincts and had become attuned to the language of the forest because of his job. He realized that the sounds weren't coming from a human, yet they also resembled the cries of someone injured and calling for help. Instinctively, he sensed that whatever was making that sound was not good. Still, unable to resist his curiosity, he began to walk deeper into the forest. With each step, he was getting closer to the source of the sound. When he reached the spot where the sound was closest, he encountered a sight he had never expected. A bear was caught, each limb entangled, groaning in pain. The bear had been caught in a trap set by hunters and had tangled its legs in barbed wire, with its head caught in a noose. It was trapped from every angle and in a state of utter despair. Every time the bear moved to escape, it caused itself more pain. The poor animal was making those desperate, pleading cries due to its agony. When the bear made a sudden move to stand, David instinctively pointed his rifle at it. David was quite experienced in matters like these because of his work. He knew what a bear was capable of and how powerful it could be, especially when injured, which often made them more aggressive. Letting his guard down could have been fatal for David. However, a voice inside David told him that this time was different and he needed to help. It was as if the bear, with its desperate eyes, was begging for help. Overcome with compassion for the bear, David decided to set aside his fears and concerns and approach it. To rescue the bear and examine the trap, he had no choice but to get closer. But what was expected happened. As David approached, the frightened animal lashed out with a powerful blow to defend itself. At that very moment, David did something even he hadn't expected of himself. To show he meant no harm, he dropped the only thing he had to protect himself, his rifle. This act, a demonstration of his peaceful intentions, seemed to work as the bear gradually began to calm down. The poor animal had probably spent its entire life running from hunters and their guns, seeing them as a threat. But now, the person approaching had empty hands, indicating the threat was gone. While the threat might have been eliminated for the bear, the same couldn't be said for David. He had put his life in danger and was now completely unarmed. What he did wasn't something a normal and rational person would do. But David once again chose to trust his instincts. David slowly got even closer and knelt beside the bear. He kept his hands visible at all times to earn the bear's trust. The bear seemed to understand all of this and, surprisingly, remained calm. It didn't make any moves to scare David either. David began examining the traps that had ensnared the bear. He first focused on the barbed wires that had wrapped around its legs. The wires had already started to pierce the bear's skin. Carefully, David began to remove the barbed wire from the bear's leg. The poor bear groaned in pain as the barbs dug into its flesh. David removed all the wires. Now, only the trap around its paw remained. Once he removed this, the bear would be completely free. There were two possibilities. Either the bear would attack David once it was freed, or it would run away from the spot. Unfortunately, David had no choice but to trust. Gathering all his courage and love for animals, he freed the bear's paw from the trap. At last, the poor bear was free. But David did not expect the bear's reaction. Instead of leaving, the bear lay down right where it was. Meanwhile, David took the opportunity to step back. From where he stood, David couldn't help but feel sad. The bear had cuts and wounds on almost every part of its body. David felt the bear's pain within himself. A few minutes later, the bear tried to gather its strength and stand up. It was losing its balance as it walked. Stumbling and limping, the bear tried to move, but eventually collapsed to the ground. Without thinking, David rushed over and knelt beside the bear. He spoke to it in a calm voice, trying to soothe it. David didn't want to leave the animal alone here, because the hunters in the forest wouldn't leave the poor animal in peace. If they caught it, they would do things no human heart could bear. David made his decision. He immediately grabbed his radio and called the local wildlife clinic. He explained the situation and asked for help. The clinic promptly sent an emergency team to David's location. The team tranquilized the bear and took it in for examination. Researchers concluded that the bear had likely been subjected to this torture for days without food or water. Infection had begun to form in the bear's open wounds. It was deemed necessary for the bear to undergo surgery to prevent the progression and effects of the infection. If emergency intervention wasn't provided, the wounded bear had a high risk of losing a leg. Together, they carefully carried the bear into the transport vehicle. Within 30 minutes, they reached the clinic. The bear was immediately taken into emergency surgery. All the veterinarians and wildlife specialists joined forces to save the bear's life. They disinfected the bear's open wounds and stitched up the ones that required it. Antibiotics were administered to combat the infections. After all the procedures were completed, the doctors revealed a chilling truth. This revelation shocked everyone, including David. The bear incident David had encountered was not the first. Similar incidents had been reported in the last few weeks, even within the past month. Learning this, and the thought that other animals might be subjected to such torture, truly angered David. In the following days, the bear was kept under observation and sedated. With good care and treatment, it gradually began to regain its strength. Meanwhile, the rescue team and doctors debated the idea of releasing it back into the wild. David vehemently opposed and refused this idea. With so many dangers, humans, and their traps in the forest, releasing the bear made no sense. The likelihood of it going through the same ordeal was high, and this time they might not be able to save it. But that wasn't the only problem. Unfortunately, there were insufficient shelter and resources to house the bear for more than a few days. They had no choice but to release the bear back into the wild. With the situation being what it was, David had no other option. Before releasing the bear, he had to return to the forest and find the culprit responsible for this. He was on a tight schedule and had to hurry. Immediately, he took the evidence gathered at the clinic and went to the police station. He began the investigation with the animal control team. But this wasn't enough for David. He felt he needed to track the culprit himself to resolve this incident. He began investigating, equipping himself and placing hidden surveillance cameras in the areas of the forest where hunting was most common. However, he found no trace of anyone. Days were passing quickly. The veterinarians couldn't reach David, but they would soon release the bear into the wild. Finally, one night, David was awakened by the alarm from the wildlife camera. He immediately jumped up. Adrenaline seemed to have replaced the blood in his veins. Grabbing a flashlight, he set out for the forest. David, trembling with excitement, began following the tracks in the forest. In the pitch-dark night, every movement caused his heart to race. Soon, he was closer to where the sounds were coming from. This was an area he rarely checked while patrolling the forest. Suddenly, the sounds stopped. The terrifying silence of the forest took their place. David held his breath and kept taking steps. Right in front of him, he saw a newly set trap. The man must be nearby. When he turned around, he saw a dark figure approaching him. Instantly, he leaped at the approaching figure and attacked. There was a struggle for a while, but David eventually managed to knock him out. This was indeed the man who had set the traps. David immediately called the police to the scene. The police arrived and arrested the man. They gathered the remaining evidence and went to the police station. During questioning, the man confessed to his crime and revealed the locations of all the other traps he had set. The authorities found and neutralized all the traps that had been described. Then, something unexpected happened. The wounded bear had recovered and was released back into the forest. They transported it in a truck, releasing it deep into the forest. However, the bear made an unexpected move the moment it regained its freedom. While everyone expected it to flee, the bear stopped and turned around, looking back at the people who had saved it with eyes that seemed to express gratitude. Seeing this, David and the other rescue team members couldn't hold back their tears. The bear looked ahead again and started moving toward the depths of the forest, disappearing among the tall trees.